um, but primarily in a sort of supportive role. And I've written around the themes that the women's movement has raised. But let's put me in context, okay? Not in an exaggerated way. But it's true that I'm a feminist and I've stayed with feminism all my life. And I have investment in seeing a better world as far as we are concerned. But I also I have an investment in seeing a better world, not only from the point of view of women, but from the point of view of um, men, women, children in India, and hope that we will have, at some point, your generation will rework towards a better future. Okay. Okay. Now, I'm not sure. I was very keen on you watching the film, uh, perhaps because it gives me a point where we could discuss um, sexual harassment in a context. Since you're all members of the AISA's uh, your unit dealing specifically with sexual violence, I think that I felt that this film raised those questions and gave you the arc in which we can contextualize violence against women, uh, because violence against women can be, I mean, is manifold, but this is the kind of violence against women that we have had to battle um, on the front lines for a variety of in a variety of ways. Now, let me. I don't want to go. It's impossible to do justice to the idea of the women's movement's arc of engagements. I'm currently in the process of making a film which is extracting and archiving from films that have already been made by feminists on the women's movement. And at some point, that will be available, and people will all be able to. It'll take a while, but you'll be able to see that. And I think you'll see the way in which um, uh, that film moves. You'll see really the arc of the engagements of the women's movement uh, in the context of trying to battle various forms of violence. Not all of it is sexual violence. A lot of it is actually custodial violence, violence against women, even by within the family. And as one of the early things that we had done as part of the democratic rights group that I'm involved with, have been involved with, the PUDR, we actually had a report on dowry murders, and it was entitled "Inside the Family," because this is what was happening within the four walls of the home. And what was explosive about that moment was that that violence had reached such levels that it was coming out in certain ways, but conceptualizing it was itself complicated. And I think squarely saying democratic rights is not only about what's happening in streets, in factories and fields and whatever it is, but also within the home, was an important issue that for us as feminists to make democratic rights organization acknowledge it. So, in that sense, I think the struggle to conceptualize as you also fight back is a phenomenon which we've had to engage with, because we didn't receive theory. Uh, we didn't actually, whatever forms of theoretical engagements or conceptualizations existed, didn't give us actually the tools by which we could address the peculiar forms of gender-based violence that we can see across the globe, but particularly in our South Asia, which is so much of it is focused within the family. Okay, so with that kind of opening, now I would want to actually seriously engage with the question of sexual harassment, because you're all members of the team of a unit which is actually going to look at all this. But I'll just briefly give you um, a small overview, because that's what you requested. You requested that I do an overview of the women's movement. Let's just begin with, it's conventional to consider that the women's movement in India um, was triggered off by the outrageous judgment of the Supreme Court. Today we are all bemoaning the work of the Supreme Court, but let's see that it's got a long history of actually letting people down badly. And the first set of people it let down was with that so openly and so negatively was actually with that Mathura judgment, where it suggested that there were no signs of stiff violence, stiff resistance. Then it was the relationship was not, it was not rape, and it was not, it was in fact consensual. So it's the outrage of that particular formulation by Supreme Court judges, which in a sense acted as a trigger. It's not that the violence against women was new. Everyone knew that violence against women was new, was not new. It had existed. And if you look at the memoirs of activist women, including political women, wives of important leaders in the left movement, for instance, have written their memoirs and so on and described how, I think it was Renu Chakravarti who describes how one woman came onto the stage in a very, what would you call it, anguished and angry condition, saying, "Comrade, tell me, is it all right to beat your wife?" And that's said on the stage. You go and grab a leader who's speaking. So, in a sense, let's begin by saying that the artificial division that organizations have to deal with, and left and democratic organizations have to deal with issues outside class exploitation, caste, exploitation, and so on. But actually, at the end of the day, leaving out a whole chunk of women within the domestic sphere, as if to say they don't really need the attention that they should get. So it's been a long struggle to put violence against women on the map. And what is significant is that, so the battle, to some extent, to acknowledge that violence against women is also violence. It's not that it's not violence. It's just to have that acknowledged was an important thing. Now, because the Mathura case was so dramatic in terms of the judgment, it's not that rapes did not happen and that policeman didn't rape, but it was the judgment that triggered off the outrage. It was from and it is interesting that there are the lawyers and whatever it is. There are 4 lawyers who write that letter, but it's not just, and it's primarily one. It's 2 men and 2 women who write that letter. It's Upendra Bakshi, Kelkar, Raghunath Kelkar. These are the 2 men. And then there was Lautika Sarkar and there was Vasudha Dhagamwar. So those are the 4 letter writers. They felt outraged. And as that letter, and since I've done a little bit of research on this in recent years, recent months particularly, it's important to recognize that letter, that first, open letter to the judges, to the lords, was not published in India. So when we think of media silencing us and all the rest of it, it was published in the Dawn newspaper in Pakistan first, because it was sent to them. Here it looked like it couldn't be picked up. Then it was picked up and put into small newspaper, evening type newspapers, carried on as a story there, and was picked up by a couple of young women who were on catching the train in Bombay, local stations. And it's that letter to the lordships, which republished in this small magazine, led to the Bombay women, a group of women in Bombay, deciding to hold a meeting, and 50 letters were sent out 49 of those women showed up for a meeting. And that was the beginning of the mobilization on the outrageous rape judgment. So, and then, you know that one of the issues that gets picked up, and there is a continuous thread around that, is quite significant, and I'll return to this theme later on. But actually, the other area of violence against women, which is like um, goes almost hand in hand, or within a year or 2 years, you find that starting to happen, is actually the sacred sphere of the home, where dowry violence in Delhi, and I'm citing Delhi because that's where I lived and that's where I picked up, and where I myself was participated in these mobilizations. Um, Dowry violence against women inside the safe, sacred space of the home uh, suddenly burst out into the public sphere. And um, the two together, the sexual violence on the one hand, in a thana, in a custodial context, and domestic violence also in a custodial context, because they are within the family, they are in the custody of their in-laws or whatever it is, so it's a custodial situation in both cases. Because Mathura was raped in a police station in the custody of the of while she was in the custody of the police, custodial nature of the violence was actually quite interesting to see at that moment, and I'd like you to notice that also. Okay, now that leads to its own mobilization. It was a very powerful moment when, and I'm not going to labor the point. Um, it also, in a sense, feminist women, young women were ready for it, ready for the mobilization in a variety of ways. And let me draw from my own college, and you're all, many of you are students. Um, in Miranda House, we were already raising questions around portrayal of women, gender issues of that kind had already come up, and we were, um, for instance, Miss Miranda contest was knocked off by our students. So we had a really radical bunch of young women who were already asking questions. It's at that stage that these two sort of, let's say, two sites of violence against women was first brought to the public sphere. And so um, the one of the responses was, while we wrote parchas, we circulated letters and petitions, that form of course carried on, but it was the first time that women used street theater to come onto the come into parks and places like that where theater was performed. And I particularly want to flag. People know that there was a famous play called Om Swaha, which they did on dowry violence. What most people don't know is that there was also a play that some of my ex-students created um, on sexual violence, on rape, because at that point, actually, the rape law was also being contested and it was being transformed at that moment, between 1980 and 83, when the new rape law came. There was a lot of action at that stage. And I can remember a play in which Anuradha Kapoor, the famous theatre person, who was also retired as the director of the National School of Drama, who had been an ex-student of ours in Miranda House, she crafted a play around rape. Now, portraying rape in a street play is very tough. Portraying it in a theater would be very tough, but in a street play was extremely, and you couldn't be voyeuristic. You couldn't actually show anything that would lead to some kind of response. So what is significant is that they came up with a strategy how to represent it without um, in a sense, embodying it with a person, and that context, that the create sort of lecherous policemen and hapless women and stuff like that. So what was interesting is that they came up, and this of you, since you're all young and you're all activists of different ways, they came up with a strategy in which they used a gungru in the place of a woman in the thana, and they tossed the gungru from one policeman to the other. They tossed it across, so it's the gungru who represented the woman. So she was being um, uh, collectively molested or sexually raped in the police thana. And so I mentioned this is only part of the very rich way in which the women's movement also responded to the challenges um, of the moment in trying to think through, conceptualize, and also portray. So that's one of the creative things that was done. So anyway, now when these two twin sites uh, showing us that there is actually continuity in violence against women, both, I mean, that women were not safe anywhere. And from the time of many of the student agitations that they have been arguing that, look, women are not safe, nothing to do with age or with what the clothes that you wear or whatever it is. It is actually something to do with the structures in which women, patriarchal power is displayed against women. So I, I'd like to say that I don't need. I'm not going to go into the details of something of the circularity of the issues that we deal with came back to us when the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of India, the Gogoi case came up. That was like 40. I think it was 40 years. Uh, I remember it because I went to a demonstration in front of the Supreme Court, and I got arrested. I got arrested. I mean, that is instead of the. I'm not the only one who was arrested. Everybody on the street was arrested because we were outside the Supreme Court. And I remember saying to the policewomen, I'm not going to go. You can't arrest me. I'm doing nothing. I'm standing here by myself in front of the Supreme Court. But they said, no, but we were all, put into a van and taken across and so on. My point is, even 40 years after the Mathura judgment and so much happening thereafter, we were still faced with a situation where a woman's testimony was not being taken to seriously in terms of the allegations she was making. So, in that sense, I think what is significant is, in some ways, you can't, given the structures against us, you can't stop raising issues and stop fighting back and having to be more and more creative as you go along through all of this. Okay, so I'm going to park that here, and I'm going to just consider the more detailed question around sexual violence, around sexual harassment, uh, which is a peculiar thing that we started to confront post the emergence of, see, the classroom space was always there. And what was happening in universities, schools, and so on has always happened. What was new, I think, was to see that in the workspaces, and I'm just trying to alert you to the finer points of this question, the workspaces in the form of the employment situation. Now, you find that as more and more women go out to work, certain spaces have existed. It's been problematic to consider putting even guidelines into place in those places. Like you are all a student body, you know how difficult it has been to actually ensure that you have a sexual harassment policy in place, and that it is able to confront the issues as you would like it to be confronted. But uh, but the realization that is that, as the movement intensified, expanded, and so on, we knew there was violence across the board. But what was striking is to think about then women entering the workforce in larger and larger numbers, and now not to have, and that space being sexualized for them, not consensually, not that they were seeking to sexualize it, but it was being sexualized by the unequal power and then the attitude of men who treated women's bodies and women's entry into their physical spaces with the kind of churlishness and with the kind of patriarchal power that they have always enjoyed. So at the end of the day, it was a new phenomenon. And I know that in places like Delhi University, where for a very long time, I think we struggled on this question, most of our struggles, we also struggled to put policies in place. And we did a lot of creative work around that, the policy that we put together in Miranda House, I'm sorry, in Delhi University, even in JNU in the form of the GSCASH, these were good policies that we thought through, fought for, and implemented on the ground. And we tried to make it fair on all sides. Um, One thing that we did over there was, and it's a point that we should think about in our discussion just now, there are two ways of dealing with redressal for sexual harassment. One is to go the criminal law route, okay, which has been opened up also with under the new 2013 law. There is that route is available in the universities and so on, which are spaces of a certain kind. We did not want, and we worked very hard to make it a civil redressal, not a criminal offense. Um, that the criminal offense part of it, what did we want? We wanted actually the problem to end. We wanted women to we wanted the attitude to consider that women can be trivialized into whatever non-consensual behavior was actually what was the problem. Um, and so a lot of our work was to fine tune and create a guideline which would work in the context of a work situation, which could be universities and which could be office spaces and whatever it is. We were particularly challenged to do this in the context of the universities. And we also acknowledged that there was a difference between the in the power hierarchy between the teacher or the teaching community vis-a-vis the student community and the student problems of sexual harassment. And so it was actually, that was a big challenge, how to deal with it, how to provide redressal for it, and so on. So we have tried to go this route. There's this sense that feminists have just are interested, and the attitude of the um, people outside is to say, hang them, hang them, hang them, kind of, there is sexual violence, hang them. But the fact of the matter is that there is a range of ways in which there is sexual violation of the woman's bodily autonomy and her right to be herself safely in public spaces, which is like what is being um, thwarted by the uh, attitude of unequal way in which the power relations is operating there. So I think in that sense, I feel that we did an enormous amount of work in trying to create a policy which would provide you with civil redressal, because what we wanted was to be able to work in a non-threatening sexualized atmosphere in which we could do our work and go about doing whatever it is, whether it was classroom, whether it was office space, whether it was that is the professors, between the teachers, between students, between whatever it is. Now, I'm not sure how some of this is working in your places, because I think the GSCASHs have been reduced in their power, and I don't even know very many cases that are coming up in institutional, um, in university like spaces or offices and so on. I haven't come across a good case that in recent days I can attach myself to and say, okay, this is an interesting phenomenon, let's look at it. So that's where we stand on on this kind of so what is the challenge? And I wanted you to screen this film. I don't know how many of you could see it. Because it has the arc. It has the larger arc. The relationship between, I mean, sexual violence can be what happens in offices and spaces like that, what happened to Bhavari, what happened to finally to Bansing's daughter, or many, many kinds of. There is an arc of sexual violence or sexualized violence that you see in this, whatever. And you can also see that the uh, non consensual nature is at the heart of the issue. That is, we are not moral policers. We don't care what people do consensually. Okay. Uh, this is the problem. The problem is the non consensual nature of the issue. And it's the belief that the man has a right uh, to inflict, you know, psychological and emotional and physical damage to people that he come across. And this is not to say that you can't, strictly speaking, one should also consider non-binary situations. We should definitely not consider that um, that you know, everyone is entitled. Various groups are also entitled, but there's also power relations happening in a variety of ways, and it's one of the challenges, in my opinion, to create a sexual harassment policy which actually is sympathetic and sensitive to the issue without necessarily treating it as punitive and and send them to jail kind of situation. That's where the real challenge as far as sexual harassment and sexual violence is concerned. There is a large arc. What is it that we can do to provide civil remedy so that the woman's dignity and autonomy, and I don't mean only the women, but the one partner's, whatever the genders might be, is something that we can keep. This was one of our big challenges, to make it um, to not make it male female gender type of thing, but to actually have it wider than that. And that's something that we tried to do in the Delhi University syllabus. Sorry, Delhi University, um, uh, which is of course dead. They are not using it any longer. We also wanted to ensure that the people in the committees and so on have a certain kind of um, stature and autonomy to act, and that the institutional authority structure will not crush the possibilities of genuinely providing relief to the survivor who has brought the case to as a complaint. So those are things like. Let me just stop at that, because I think we can now have a free floating. That's my sense. We can have a free flowing discussion, and you can raise issues, and I will bring my experience both in the sexual harassment committees as well as in my general understanding of the issue, and we can take it from there.
Yes, Uma. Thank you so much for this conversation starter. Uh, those who want to ask questions or want to participate in the discussions, you may raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute yourself, and yeah, then you can ask your question or participate in the discussion. Uma, I had one question that I noted down as you were speaking.
Okay.
You've talked about how, there is, in cases of rape and all, you talk about, hang the rapists, or, in case of even GSCASH has to negotiate this
Yeah.
balance when you're conducting the inquiry, where,
Yeah.
how does the feminist movement negotiate between retributive justice and restorative justice, which is, why even ICCs or GSCASH was also set up. That was one of the intentions with which sexual harassment redressal had to be made. So how did the feminist movement negotiate with this form of sentiment that people have?
You see, firstly, we have the other extreme. We have the problem. The other extreme is kuch hua hai to nahi hai. Nothing has happened. Why are you making a noise? उसने उसको छेड़ा ही तो है, उसने उसको स्टॉक ही तो किया है, उसने उसको See, the harm that is caused by the non-invasive sexual violence is what is normally what comes up under the. I mean, we have to constantly deal with situations where there may be systematic trivializing, systematic humiliation, systematic sexualizing of the, say, classroom space. We had a case like that in Delhi University, where the teacher was constantly making references, veiled references, which were very sexually offensive. Okay, but it was happening in a classroom. There were boys in it, there were girls in it. Everyone felt a little bit uncomfortable, but it didn't lead to. It was taken up as an issue then finally by a collection of students. Now our thing was the university is a peculiar kind of space. I'm not suggesting that it's unique, but it's a peculiar kind of space where people come to actually receive. It's a period in your life where you're being trained to become, someone who'll go off and work in the world outside. It's a particularly important phase in the lives of students because they have to grow into themselves as the full potential that a student can have can only come out, through the years in the university situation. So the classroom or the university space was a particular kind of space where sexual harassment or the trivializing of women on a systematic basis by sexualizing them and treating it as something that was, but we had to confront all the time कि रेप तो नहीं हुआ ना, assault तो नहीं हुआ, क्लासरूम में कुछ बोले हैं, आते जाते बंदे एक दूसरे से कुछ कह रहे हैं, which is whatever. Now that you have to go. That's the kind of stuff that the world will tell you around. It's not the retributive justice with rape, actual sexual violence. This hang the rapist is coming out of the drama of the moment. You notice, when does it come? It comes when there's a particularly horrific rape event. You didn't get it with Kathua. When that little girl is raped, nobody said hang the rapists at that stage. It's a peculiar phenomenon in which people deal with the emotion of the moment when the middle class, well, let's say. So it happened in Nirbhaya, it happened afterwards with it's come up recently in the RG Kaur case and so on. Hang the rapist is the simplest thing that we can do. Hang kar do, problem solved ho gaya. Politically, that's the easiest thing to do. The more difficult thing to do, and as something that what's her name, Vrinda brought up very well in the discussion. Vrinda Grover brought up very well in the discussions that were happening on the media following the RG car, is that why is nobody looking at the whole regime that feminists have asked to be put in place to provide safe working conditions in the thing? Is there's no redressal system within? You're being threatened, or you're being whatever it is, you're being stalked, or whatever is happening. There's nothing within the institute. As she said, you are working with a space where doctors have to stay all night. You don't even have a space where they can be, parked and they can feel safe. You have done nothing to put institutional mechanism in place to provide safety, security, and bodily autonomy. The sexual harassment Vishaka guidelines is very clear. Very clear. The onus is on the employer. The onus is on the institutional system. It is not on the individual man or woman who is faced with that kind of situation. Now, we are typical in the sense that we don't even know what the issues at stake are. We don't even have the clarity of the issues on the ground. What are we seeking? We are seeking an end to the problem. We are not seeking necessarily, we have to make a distinction. We may want there's a separate question about carceral justice, okay? But this one is sexual harassment is really about institutional remedies. The institution is responsible. The institution has the onus of providing the safety. You can't escape it. You can't treat it as hang the rapist, at the end of the day. So RG Kar is completely went off the tangent. I don't think there were even there's anyone who raised it. In the case of Nirbhaya, because it was sexual violence and not sexual harassment, I mean, not sexual violence in a public space, not in a institutional space of that kind, it had a different, and it's tragic. The grosser the crime and the greater the mobilization, the easier the issue for the establishment is concerned is to simply say, hang the rapist. And we will give you justice, we'll hang the rapist. So you don't actually go to the, and then if for instance, and many of these cases, it'll just go to the, it'll get knocked down at the high court level, it'll get whatever it is, so whereas what we're seeking is safe, autonomous, dignified space to be able to work. Don't sexualize that space and make it difficult for you to have your autonomy in being able to work there in the circumstances that you would like, So that's the issue as far as I'm concerned in sexual harassment, in the context of sexual harassment. Yeah.
Few questions have come in the chat. Do you want to take them one by one, or you want me to give it?
No. We should take them one by one only.
Okay. All right. So, one question is, how can male students actively support the women's movement without taking up too much space in the discourse? What are the responsibilities of male allies in feminist student activism?
I think there's a huge need for it, because one doesn't, you see, it's not a confrontation between a progressive student organization will actually see first they need to understand, everyone needs to understand. And I'm not sure there is enough understanding of it. We are not doing, one of the big things that we had said when we started off is that we must have workshops to try and understand. Workshops are important from the point of view of sharing, and we need to do it within all sections, not just men and women, but within men and women, all sections. Like, for instance, in a university space, even the administrative staff should have a workshop to be able to understand. We can't actually treat this as only student or teacher. In this university system, there are many segments that occupy that space. What is sexual harassment? What are we seeking? What is the what's the difference between that and, say, for instance, the criminal route that you might take? I think we need to even have this clarity. What are we seeking? We're seeking a civil redressal. At least that's what we treated. And that's, I think even the Vishaka guidelines is meant to be doing that. It is a civil redressal. Put institutional mechanisms in place in all employment spaces, in all places wherever you are. So if you look at that, it's quite clear. Now, male allies, I think it's not difficult to be a male ally. Basically you have to subscribe to the understanding that we have, that we have tried to create. And that's a process. I'm not suggesting we know it straight away. I think the group in Delhi University took something like 10 years before we actually formulated. We started off early, and then we did some really hard work. And finally, we came up with something which we felt we were satisfied. And we were constantly growing and tweaking. Like, for instance, the question of LGBTQ being put in, not making it male, female only, but making it, whatever. So all of that is a long journey. And men and women have to be in that journey together. Students have to go in that journey together, it's not something that I wouldn't even call it male allies. Because the men can be objects themselves of sexual violence. after all. And non-consensual violence is endemic. It's part of the power relation. So it seems to me that that's not difficult. It's not really. It's a question of. I think that we have not done the hard work of trying to talk about some of these issues, and it's an ongoing changing situation. I have to tell you that, it's quite amazing how quick the changes uh, that are happening on the ground are happening. So we have to constantly engage and fine tune and tweak and sort of think about in creative ways.
There's another question. Even when women hold leadership positions in student organizations,
Hmm.
they're often sidelined in decision making.
Hmm.
How can we ensure that women's leadership in student politics is substantive
Hmm.
rather than symbolic?
I think everyone has to work on that. The groups have to work on it. It's taken for granted. See, the whole problem is that we have inherited a kind of culture in which the revolutionary leader is a guy. He's the chap who holds he's the one who speaks with great eloquence and whatever it is. And so um, it's the field has been constructed in a certain kind of way. And so at the end of the day, I think uh, the right to uh, you know who will lead a discussion and who will ensure basic minimum norms in the discussion, it's a tough one. And we'll have to assert ourselves. I know I had to do this once at a meeting when the men were going for each other's hair. They were going for the jugular, that was attacking each other. We were going to hold try and address the problem of the disappearances that were happening in Kashmir, uh, particularly at that time it was staged encounters, and there were people like ittarwalas and carpenters and so on were being picked up and then passed off as militants and stuff like that. And when this issue broke, there was all sections. Everyone was agitated about it, and all the sections, for some reason, that meeting was happening in Delhi. So a lot of Kashmiri leaders had also come over here, and we were all there, and so on. Now, one of the problems with when you put a group like this together, and you might understand um, at the end of the day, because I think student groups are also like that, is that they don't actually they're not listening to each other often. I don't mean even women don't listen to each other. We've got set positions, and we are screaming at each other and so on. And it's clear that you're not making any progress. You're not going to move forward and deal with the substantive issue on the ground, which was like whatever it is. I remember I have had a lot of irritation about the idea that the male theorist is going to give the line at the end of the day. मुझे बहुत गुस्सा आता है at the end. मतलब consensual तो it's not something that is actually a shared position that comes out. It's there in many, many places, including democratic rights organizations as well. I think I just got so angry, and I was senior. I was fairly senior. I suddenly used my authority, got up, and I said, shut up, all of you. Just shut up. Seba, you and I will conduct the meeting. They didn't know what hit them. They retreated. They just retreated. And they sat down meek as lambs. And then the two of us conducted the meeting, and we created the backdrop for having that meeting, that hearing on the streets of Jantar Mantar, where 50 people came from Kashmir to testify, and we got that meeting going. At the end of the day, we're all in the same space. We're all fighting with the same issue, but we're not listening to each other, and there's this leadership tangle and so on. So I think there are ways we shouldn't allow masculinist uh, cultures which are passed off as kind of revolutionary cultures. I'm sorry, that's not true. It shouldn't be like that. And I think we can do it. It's not that we can't do it. ऐसी बात नहीं है. हमको assert करने की जरूरत है. I'm not going to say theory तू करेगा, action मैं करूंगी. नहीं जी, दोनों ही theory बनाएंगे, दोनों ही action करेंगे. So I don't believe in a hierarchy of working out. So, and I'm sure we can. It's not that at the end, if you're achieving the same goal, we have to find ways of being able to work that in. No? Yeah.
There's another question. Some argue that feminist movements should focus on class struggle rather than gender alone. How do you see the relationship between feminist struggles and broader class struggles in India?
No, I don't think there's no contest. You can't say this is better, that is worse. Okay, that's only a notional thing. Why do we think that class struggle is? Are we saying class struggle is something that only some people believe in, and the rest of us feminists don't believe in class struggle? I mean, I don't believe that you can be a feminist without actually dealing with the inequalities in the world across. Let's not even call it class. What about caste? See, the struggles for a more egalitarian, more humane world is something that we are all full participants in. I cannot say to me that when I go to a women's group, I'm doing women's movement, and when I'm going to another, I'm going to a sort of say discussion on peasant movements. This is one of the problems that feminists have faced in particular. We've had to break down that notion that these are separate. After all, how can you do a class struggle without addressing also the inequalities between men and women and the questions that will arise? What kind of a world are you going to envisage later on? What kind of and do we not participate in class struggle? Do women not participate in class struggle together? So is it, and do we have to be, now I'm a feminist, there's no primary and secondary contradiction. That's one of the things that I have a problem with. There's nothing that is a secondary contradiction. All contradictions are equally serious. And you can't build a new democratic world, a more egalitarian world without addressing, in our country particularly, the complexity of. Tell me, how can we separate that? We're reproducing caste all the time. And we're reproducing caste all the time, participating in that process because men and women are reproducing, and you're reproducing together, and you're reproducing caste. Uh, I don't believe in this business of theoretically we should divide these things. I believe that all struggles, egalitarian struggles, have to be fought simultaneously without creating a hierarchy. And unless we do that, we are not going to change the world. We should be clear in what direction we want to change the world. It's not, to my mind, this is not a structural issue. It's not a, it's not a cultural issue. It's not a structural issue. It's a question of acknowledging that if you have a more egalitarian world, then all sections must fight for it simultaneously, not without creating a hierarchy.
There's another question. Ma'am, we don't see feminist perspective on mainstream politics as we used to see in our history book. Why is that?
I didn't quite understand it in the sense, why are you, as we used to see it in our history books? Meaning?
Bhavya, would you like to?
Yeah, let her just explain.
Yeah. Do you want
Bhavya?
to unmute yourself?
Yeah, ma'am. Ma'am, the question was that when I study my historic books, is that
Yeah.
I find feminist perspective on each and everything, right?
Hmm.
Like feminist perspective on Indian history, feminist perspective on this, feminist perspective on 1857 revolt, ma'am.
Huh.
But today, we do not see that feminist perspective in the things that are concerning to our mainstream politics. We don't see feminist perspective, feminist POV. So, ma'am, my question was that why is that we do not see that?
No. I think that it's there. It's very much there. For instance, there is a feminist perspective even on say on environmental movement, on there's a feminist perspective, even on the nuclear movement and so on. It's not that it doesn't exist. It may not be mainstream, it may not be found in a certain kind of way, but there is a perspective. It's a very clear perspective. In the world that we want to live in, should not have a number of things at the end of the day. See, it's easier to say this in the context of history, because if you're a student, you'll in the classroom you'll be told that, okay, this is the feminist perspective on, say, for instance, 1857, because you might have written on, in fact, even the caste perspective, that Jhalkari Bai has been written about, or whatever. There are ways in which historians or people seeking to write history will get incorporated in the classroom in a certain kind of way. But to issue their attitude, their understanding of issues currently, on struggles of people's struggles today, would not be understood. Has not got into the books in the same way, okay, formal into the classroom. But whether it is fish workers, whether it is Kudankulam, whether it is any one of the struggles that is happening in the country, whether it was on Chipko, whether it was, I mean, on almost every movement, the feminist perspective is something that was articulated and visibilized, and it was factored into the into the responses. Our tragedy is that we don't write history, which is people centered. We are still dealing with political power. I mean, let me give you the example, say, for instance, of the Bodh Gaya movement. The Bodh Gaya movement, it's not written about much. It's not seen as something which classically Marxists led. It was a socialist group that founded, but this young bunch of the Yuva group from Patna, Bihar mostly, in the early 80s, went off to struggle on the land, on the issue of land rights to the uh, Mazdoors who worked on the land. Now, this was a peculiar situation um, because it was the Bodh Gaya Mahant who held the lands and directly was responsible for that structure was directly responsible for employing Dalit Mazdoors who worked the land. So there were no tenants in between. Okay, so when the land ceiling came in Bihar, uh, I- uh, uh, um, the Bodh Gaya Mahant immediately went to court and tried to get a stay on his lands being taken over, saying it is not, you got the urban ceiling land, the laws should not apply to us. Supreme Court at that time gave a good judgment, thank God. And at the end of the day, what happened? The connection went. So at the end of the day, the struggle in the groups struggled on the ground. It was long struggle, very non-violent, very interesting kind of struggle. And at the end of that period, when the land was to be finally distributed, the women who had also worked on the land along with the menfolk, and they were mostly Dalit, they came up with the fact, because they had also had some fairly intensive discussions on gender issues over there. So they demanded that the land should be given. They also worked the land. So they wanted the land in their own names, not in the names of their husbands. The husband is the head of the household. So family ko land nahi jayega. It was individual ko land jayega. And they were the first to articulate that at that point of time. And they managed to have this, stayed with the struggle. Finally, they got lands in their own names. Now, this is a struggle in which the issue of gender and caste and whatever it is came together in caste and class came together in a very interesting kind of way. And it's not something that we actually have even, I don't think none of you has probably read that in your classes, in your history books or whatever it is. But these struggles have taken place. So it's not that conceptualization and theoretical formulations have not been created as the struggle itself goes along. And I see that as something of a response to you. This is also about power. Political power can be seen from the top and can be seen from the bottom also, at the end of the day. It's also about power. So, are you okay with this answer?
Yeah, I don't think he'll be able to unmute yet again.
Tell him to unmute.
1 second. Yeah. Bhavya,
Yes,
can you
ma'am.
hear me? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Truly, ma'am. Thank you.
Are you okay with that answer?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay, thank you. Let's proceed.
Nidhi had 2 questions to ask. I'm just going to ask them to. Nidhi?
Yeah, hello, ma'am.
Hello.
Good evening. I have 2 questions. One is a very generic question, and I'm not sure how much is possible to sort of understand, but out of curiosity, also as a woman lived in the society,
Yeah.
having faced some of the injustices, I wonder, as a country, what are some of your suggestions, that could sort of empower women in society? I mean, we see already there are so many laws in place, yet it keeps happening in society like India, which is heteronormative, patriarchal. Um, yeah, so I was wondering, what are your views on that?
There is no way out except to struggle. And sometimes the struggles are slow and they take a long while to look as though they are emerging, they're fructifying, that some positive consequence comes out of it. I mean, we are a deeply hierarchical society: caste, class, gender, region, uh, the so many parts of our country are under a certain kind of thrust of whether it's neoliberal capital or whatever it is. But we are in a state of we are in a highly unequal society, and within that there are so many complications. So that's a challenge that we are faced with. Now, within that context, people haven't given up. So whether it's let's take the women's movement. It may not have articulated itself as a heteronormative group, but it must, it was that, for a long time. And that's an issue that we had a long time struggling. It took a long while to struggle and get this understood. So there was sort of a way in which it was treated as, it's happening in the private bedroom. That's none of our concern. We don't want to bring it into the public sphere and so on. Sometimes even March 8th mobilizations have failed to happen because of the strong stance taken by some groups in saying that they didn't want to address certain kinds of questions. But over a period of time, I think the fact that if you think seriously about oppression, I mean, you have to fight against oppression wherever it's coming from, in whatever direction it's coming, and power is something that we have to constantly critically engage with and refuse in a certain kind of way. So it seems to me that similarly, Dalit, the caste question is very serious, because if you see, there is a theoretical position and there is a real lived experience. The theoretical position cannot come without, in a sense, a dialogue or a free way in which we can engage with thinking through our strategies and our theories. And if we keep that space open, then you won't actually resist things. Somehow there is a tendency for the resistance to come in. Issue is raised, and immediately they're saying, this is not an issue. There are other issues more important. Hunger is more important. This one is more important, and so on. I think that's changing, and there's a resistance to thinking anything through. We are all, in some ways, conditioned by the theory that we ourselves are confronted by. I mean, like we're shaped by. So if this is our understanding at a certain point of time, we tend to force that on the. But actually, life is very changing in its reality, and it's constantly and the desire to. We have to understand that people don't want to live in necessarily in imprisoned ways. They want to actually be living in freer and more open ways. And the struggle to create that kind of world is a long struggle, but it's something that you have to engage in, and it can't be given up, because otherwise, what is the point? Point is to change the world, not only think of it theoretically.
Thanks, Uma. Nitin has a question, and maybe we'll stop having questions after this because it's close to 8. If the others have any questions, you can perhaps write to us at aisagskash@protonmail.com. I'll put the email ID in the chat box, and then maybe I can send the questions to Uma. After she responds, I can send it back to you. But for now, Nitin, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hello, I'm audible.
Hello.
Hello, मेरा आवाज आ रहा है?
हाँ
हेलो
हाँ हेलो
मेरा जो सवाल था वो बेसिकली एक मेथोडोलॉजीज को लेके था. आई मीन टू से जैसे कि फेमिनिस्ट मेथोडोलॉजी और जो एक क्वेयर मेथोडोलॉजी है सेक्सुअल वायलेंस को एड्रेस करने का, आई थिंक दे बोथ डिफर. सो आई वांट योर व्यूज कि
No, tell me how they differ. You tell me, and then I'll be able to answer the question better.
I mean, the queer movement has labeled feminist movement in many ways, that they reduce the addressing of sexual harassment in some sort of identity directionism, such as either they tend to reduce in the terminology of women, gay, bi, and all other spectrums. But then there is queer methodology, which says that there is not necessarily one should fit in the already available categories, even it's a gay or it's a lesbian, or it's
No,
not,
fair
or
enough.
the one is not. So how do you see things, this kind of do you think it's a deliberate sort of politics, or do you think it's something which
one of the problems in with what we consider to be this is feminist methodology, this is queer methodology, is because we've frozen feminist into a trope and queer as opening some things up, which is fair enough. I think depending on where you are, I myself have suffered from. I know, because I've been part of struggles where we had to force the discussion on queer questions of queerness to what would be regarded as organizations which was democratic and feminist as they call themselves and so on. But they would see things like, for instance, I've had this argument that bijli pani is more important than what is happening in the bedroom. Ye argument hamare samne bhi laya gaya tha. I've been in groups where we were trying to push this binary that existed between queer on the one hand and left, organized left on the other, sections of the organized left, not all. It took a long while, but we had to carry on this discussion for a long time to show how much violence there was in the experience of queerness. It was not, violence. The prerogative of having suffered violence is not only it's not only as women, but it can come in a variety of ways. So it took a long while. I remember that one time we didn't even hold the same Marchit event. We had a separate one in Delhi University where the queer question came up in a big way and so on. And so we were able to express ourselves autonomously without getting fitted by the paradigms that existed. एक प्रॉब्लम है विद अ फिक्स्ड पैराडाइम. इफ योर पैराडाइम इज नॉट गोइंग टू, आपका थियोरी जो है वो खुल करके बात करने को तैयार नहीं है और सोचने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, तो वो तो फिर वो खाई बना देते हैं ना. दे मेक अ डिवाइड बिटवीन ये सही है वो बोलते हैं. जो चीज हमें सिखाई गई है हम उसको सही मान लेते हैं. वी थिंक दैट इज फाइन. We are not creative in our relationship, but I think the women's movement has done better on it than other movements in some ways. They have incorporated the questions, not always, not all groups, maybe, but certainly identity is something. Verma ke time, so I once saw it. We saw 2 days of mobilization and advocacy that we were doing, and there were little tensions between queer groups themselves. That is, lesbian groups on the one hand with gay men's groups were sometimes pitted. But this is a matter in which theory has to, your theoretical position has to, whatever it is uh, your theoretical position is something that has to be constantly tested and refined. We can't have a theory which is like closed. अब हम समझे नहीं, हमारे को मिल गया है ये theory, अब हम इसके बारे में सोचेंगे नहीं. Theory and analysis has to go continuously, move continuously, because you can't, the world is changing also. Issues are changing. How can we be fixed in our paradigms? Don't ask this question. It's equivalent to saying, घर में कहा जाता था, जब बोलते थे लोग कहते, the answer would be, फिर तूने मेरी बात काटी, या फिर, that is, it's a thing of, if you articulate your own position, it is immediately shut down because it's uncomfortable. But on the other hand, that's not the way to go. You have to, if you're constructively in movement, you'll have to constantly think and argue and analyze and see the strength of the positions that are coming out. You can't actually have an inflexible position. Theory kabhi khatam nahi ho sakti, Theoretical thinking has to, or analysis will have to be constantly refined. जैसे हमारी समझ बनती चली आएगी, उसको then we will have to actually factor it in. I remember this argument that I've made with my Dalit feminist friends. They wouldn't see the LGBT question seriously. Then I had to say we had to argue and say, देखो, जो जहाँ है, ये तुम नहीं कह सकते कि तुम oppressed नहीं हो, मैं oppressed हूँ. सिर्फ मतलब जो जहाँ है वो एक्सपीरियंस कर रहा है अपना ऑपरेशन, हमको उसको समझने की जरूरत है. इफ यू आर वर्किंग टुवर्ड्स अ नॉन ऑपरेसिव सोसाइटी, यू कैनॉट फ्रीज योर थियोरी एंड से तुम्हारा प्रश्न वाजिब नहीं है, तुम्हारी शोषण वाजिब नहीं है. हम मानते ही नहीं कि तुम ऑपरेस्ड हो, ये तो बात हम कह नहीं सकते ना. That would be a refusal to accept that the experience is oppressive for that person and for classes of the people that are oppressed. तो हमारी थ्योरी कभी खत्म नहीं हो सकती है. हम कभी एक पोजीशन पर आकर के we cannot close it, we can't close discussion. Argument and analysis will have to carry on because the world is changing all the time. Is that okay? बोलो जी, जवाब मुझे भी बताओ.
हाँ मैम, I agree with your analysis and articulation about changing our position and stance regarding the changing times and
ठीक है. We should carry on. मतलब ऐसा नहीं है कि we can't carry on this discussion. Okay?
Yeah. Sure, ma'am.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Uma. Just as many of the podcasts end with, the guests giving their recommendations of books, one of the participants have also asked what books you would recommend to give a comprehensive understanding of the feminist movement from the very initial stages. So perhaps with your recommendations, we can end this webinar today.
Movement pay, not so many books have been written about the movement, which have been, we can recommend, one can think of number of books that have tried. But one of the things we're trying to do is to capture that complexity in this film. There's this film that we're working on, which is a history of the movement, but it's also a history of the thinking that has gone around in the creation of the movement. But one thing I'd like to ask is, how many of you saw this film, and what did you think of it?
I think the screening happened in various places at Delhi University. I'm not sure how many of them are here. So ma'am is talking about a film called Shout, which talks about the Me Too movement. A lot of women are giving testimonies in the documentary. It's a 1.5 hour documentary. If anyone would like to watch that documentary, do write to AISA GSCASH, and then maybe we can speak to Uma ma'am and have that screening at your college.
But if you're having the screening at the college, you have to do it in controlled ways, because this is uska court injunction hai uske upar. So you public screening na kare, private screening kar sakte hain. But you can share the link and people can watch it. One of the things in this film is that the queer question is not, to my mind, independently articulated in the film. It is the stable categories of men and women who have, I think, perhaps they've participated in the movement, in the demonstrations, but I don't think that they have a character there who might talk about the manner in which, say, for instance, queer people also suffer a certain amount of violence. But let me think about the list of books. I will then say, yes, maybe we can, if I can collect a good collection, I'll send it to you. Okay? I'll send it to you, Lekha, and then you can pass it on to the others.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for a very enriching discussion today. We hope to continue this conversation in future as well. Thanks to everyone who participated in the webinar today and for staying so far. All right, let's call it a night. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night. Good night. And thanks for the questions.